Today I have this Sony Amplifier TA 212. I think the 12 is about how many watts it puts out per channel, just a 12 watts or something. It's a pretty light little amp, in very good condition. I paid $50 for this one, even though it's only a fairly low power amp, but it's got a really nice looking set of EU meters on it. And supposedly it works, and I was meant to check it within a couple of days to make sure it did work if I wanted to claim it under warranty or anything and get a discount or return it, but I completely forgot about it, so it's been sitting here for about a week. So I guess I have to test it out. The old masonite back cover's peeling up. Not your best bit of Sony equipment there, but this is a pretty old amp, I think. Made in Taiwan, well, Republic of China, so that could explain the quality of that. So it's not a Japanese build amp, even though I think it is quite old, 70s or 80s. So I guess we might as well test this thing and see if it does actually work. And it may need a few pots cleaning and stuff, which, you know, would still be classed as working. I'm not worried about that, but I hope it does actually function. Normally they're pretty good if they say it works, but some people's idea of works can be different to others. So at least power it on. We've got both lights running. It's got a couple of those little axial lead lamps there. And like with every amp, get the multimeter and check it for DC on the output. It's got the old screw terminals. Very little there, so we're safe to plug it into the speakers. Guess I should have double checked that the voltage selector there was on 240. As long as they're not on 110 or 120, we should be pretty right. And yeah, I've got a couple of speaker leads. Turn the power back off. Really have to hook these up while you're looking at them, I think. There was always a flat blade screwdriver when you don't want it, and never one when you do. Because these are not so simple to get your wires under, and you want to make sure there's no stray bits of copper shorting onto the other side. Pretty unlikely to reach that far, but best to be safe. I can't remember the last time I saw an amp with actual screw terminals on the back, but they used to be around. Pretty much think that's a 70s thing. This amp kind of looks a bit modern to be 70s, but it could well be if it's made in Taiwan. They were making stuff in Taiwan in the 80s as well, I think, and then a lot of it disappeared, at least in the consumer electronics, and they stopped making it there, or we didn't seem to see it anyway. I think Sony shifted to Malaysia for a lot of their stuff after that. Yeah, it certainly doesn't weigh a lot, so I'd say I can see the power transformer in there, not particularly big. But I did notice that if you look at the meters, it says watts. As I say, it says here watts into 8 ohms. And if that's the top of the dial there, the top graduation thing, it goes up to 40. Most of the range is, you know, almost, I guess, past 3/4 is up to 10 watts. And there is a 20 and a 40, so whether it goes well into clipping or something, turn that volume down, and can actually produce that high. It's possible in short transients. So a little bit of scratchiness in the volume, which is pretty good to at least let us know it's working. Get the CD player going, and we're on tuner. It's in quite good condition, besides the knobs being a bit dirty. It's only showing us like half a watt on the... It's going up to about 2 watts. Rather scratchy volume control, so it definitely wants it clean. Balance is good. Input select. And the other pots seem pretty good. It might be worth giving a quick clean to the bass and treble. But it'd be interesting to have a look inside this thing and just see what it's like. There's probably not much in it. What's the bet? Probably a couple of TO 220 case flat pack transistors for each side. It could even have an integrated circuit in this thing as the amplifier chip. I doubt it will, but it may have. I know Sony did use them in stuff of this sort of era, because I used to have an old receiver. It had some oddball amp chip and I either couldn't get one or it was super expensive. I can't remember which, so I think they ended up throwing it out. But I was going to modify it with a couple of amp modules. Oh yeah, we've got TO220 outputs on this heatsink. Very little in it, besides dust and cobwebs. Made in Taiwan transformer, so quite a small transformer there. 1 amp diodes. Dead giveaway, it's not very powerful. Some Elna capacitors and an Asuno electrolytic there. YECs or something. Looks like, are they Alps pots? No, there's something else I think. Bit squeaky there, that's just the plastic front I think. The fact the lamps are still going, assuming they're original, and they look like they are, doesn't look like they've been soldered, would suggest it hasn't done a lot of hours. But yeah, 2 pairs of output transistors. I can see one is a D3, is it a 313 maybe? Half covered up, it looks like the other side's a D as well. There we go, yeah, D313 I think it says. 2SD313 that is, and D313 on the other side too I think. So they're not even a complementary pair. NPN PNP. So I guess they got them set to different sides of the voltage range. Looks like a couple of little circuit breaker things in here, so at least if DC comes out of that, I think those little black things will just be like a thermal circuit breaker. It'll go open circuit if too much current runs through it. Interestingly, it's got some little germanium diodes down there. No idea what they're doing. They're going to a orange wire. Oh, they go to the VU meters, or possibly are related to that. Looks like they probably are. And it looks like a couple of trim pots maybe to set the VU meter level. A couple of other trim pots, I guess, are the bias or quiescent current or whatever of the amp stages. I guess in theory you should really look at those and there'd be a way of measuring it to make sure they're right, but this thing doesn't even look like it's done much work. And you've got your EEC amp, main amp, that's what the boards are labelled, Sony meter board there. Yeah, so not particularly exciting. I might take that out and just blow all the dust out of it. And I'll clean the pot. Okay, I got the worst of the dust out of it. So I guess we'll get the old contact cleaner. I do have the power on, I probably should turn that off. And that's the volume control there. Looks like it's, yeah, got a couple of different slots in it. That we can get the switch cleaner lubricant into. That's the front one, because they are a dual pot. And the back one, give that a good turn around. And that should more than likely fix that problem. That bit of rattly sound is not actually the pot by the sound of it. Does seem to crackle a bit at higher volume, so I'm not sure if that's the speakers or something to do with the amp. Oh, something fell off the shelf. That's probably what was rattling. The actual speakers themselves seem to be rattling a bit. So probably just the speakers. I'll have to try it on some decent speakers rather than these old ceiling speakers. I'll just take that knob off. It's got a rather fancy ring around the knob here. So you've got to give it to them in the looks department. It certainly, they did a good job of that. It's even got a little access board here to get under the circuit board, so I might have a quick look at that as well. I'm just interested whether these knobs will clean up alright. Probably need a bit of a scrub with a toothbrush, which I have there. Just need a bit of paper towel just to wipe the worst of it off. At least there's no real scratching on this thing, so it's, or a couple of tiny ones on the front, but it hasn't had the normal use where you can see people's fingernails have scratched around on the controls and stuff. Usually just like things like the power button, their fingernails will come in and hit the front panel as they've pressed the button or something. So it's usually a sign something's had a fair bit of use when they're like that. This is actually surprisingly clean. That's why I couldn't resist buying it in the end. I thought, God, it's only going to be a low power amp, but it's one of the nicest looking ones I've seen. Certainly doesn't look like your average 70s amp. Sony certainly went out of their way to make this a good looking unit. But it's not exactly high power, but you know, 12 watts a channel, a good clean 12 watts is more than most people are going to be listening to in their lounge room. Like even when I'm turning it up, that up really loud, it's only getting up to what, the sort of 1 to 2 watt range. So most amps probably only get used under 5 watts anyway. That is cleaning up rather nice even without scrubbing it with the brush. I don't think I even need to scrub it with the brush. It's coming up pretty good. Now the interesting bit is getting it back on in the right position. Just give that a bit of a clean and that. There's a little slight mark on that perspex. I think that could probably do with a little bit of a polish. You can use something like Brasso or fine metal sort of polish on some of those plastics and just get them right. The ends of these other knobs seem to be a little bit corroded, but I'm not sure if they are. Possibly they want a little bit of polish on them just to, yeah, there's a little bit of something's eaten into them slightly, I think. Even this big one's got a few little patches on there that aren't coming off. So I need to get that back on, pointing to 0. Check it goes to 10, which it does perfectly. But yeah, the front face of these knobs, ooh, a little spider, whoops, I killed him. Sorry about that, mate. But yeah, maybe a little bit on this bit as well. So it's got a few tiny little, and there's a tiny little scratches at the bottom, a few around the headphone socket, so that's been used a bit. Other than that, there's very little scratches or marks on the front. Most of this front is like new basically. There's a little mark on that bit there. Something's bumped that at some stage by the look of it. But for such an old amp, normally these things went down the food chain, so ended up in the kids' rumpus or something, got sold on to other people who used them as shed radios and stuff. And like cars, they just generally, the older stuff tend to go to rougher people basically, and people that didn't care so much about it, people that have used it and used it for parties and stuff, or you know, they got relegated out to the back shed or whatever, and where the conditions were worse. So it's nice to see one that looks like it's been sitting in the hi-fi cabinet in the lounge room for most of its life. Possibly these slight signs of corrosion because it's been in a garage or something for a while, but even then it's, I mean, it's amazingly clean for something second-hand after the time this stuff, no one bothers cleaning it, and it's terrible, covered in dirt and stuff. So these knobs are a bit dirty, that's going to need a little bit more work. Gonna have to be careful with that because these have got a pretty fine finish on them. Really nice knobs on it. Again, they look really top notch, but unfortunately that finish, it's like a rough brushed finish. That does tend to pick up dirt and stuff and keep it in there. But yeah, if this polishes up really nice, this would be a really nice looking amp. Sort of thing, even if you didn't use it, it's nice to look at. Which is kind of rare for this sort of era amp. A lot of them were pretty, I think, pretty bland looking things. I actually prefer some of the 80s and even some of the early 90s stuff for looks. A lot of 70s stuff looks a bit primitive, a bit basic, and a lot of it was pretty basic. And yeah, low powered like this was pretty standard. I guess we're going to have a quick look under that cover just to see how much access it gives to the board. Whoops, I always forget the speaker cables are so short. I really must do something about those and make them longer. But while I'm here, might as well have a look at this. See what the soldering's like. Looks pretty mint. I don't think you're going to be changing the output transistors from this position, but at least you can access some of the circuitry. Yeah, those are CB251, CB201, so they are circuit breakers, I'd say, with a part, well, number or location number as it really is, starting with CB. So that's good to see that they had some sort of protection. If you get shorted outputs and DC runs through it, they should trip before killing your speakers. The only annoying thing is this back cover springing out. I think what I might do with that is drill a hole here somewhere and put one screw just tapped into the metal by its own thread sort of thing, one self-tapping type screw, because that's just annoying. Having a bendy old cover, you could probably soak it or something and try and bend it back into shape, but I don't want to risk doing that. And now I've ripped my little speaker thing off. Check the lamp, tuner on. Yeah, this thing's pretty good. BNC. So yeah, nice little, very clean amp. Very rare to see the MDF stuff on the back of these isn't at least stained a bit or something, or dirty. Cut these price tags off the front, I guess. Hopefully I can get them off without marking anything. I'll have to soak them with the label remover, but hopefully the bulk will peel off. Maybe not. Make a liar of me. Because even just scraping these off with your fingernail can cause a bit of marks on the thing when it's in this pristine condition. Yeah, you can see all my greasy fingerprints already. But yeah, I think this is quite a nice little amplifier. I'll hook it up to my good speakers. Quite a nice light up dial there, or light up VUs. Yeah, very, very nice the way they've centered those in the middle. Got your little Sony badge in there. Like I say, certainly one of the better looking amps from that era, especially in that more budget type amps. Because this was no high-end amp at that sort of power rating. Very little in it. I mean, the sort of kit amplifiers you made back then would be similar to these type of things. Some of them were actually probably higher end than some of these low-end consumer ones. It's very rare to see, in my experience, to see any Sony amps of this era. Maybe it was just because they were super reliable, but I used to see plenty of second-hand stuff even that wasn't faulty, and very rare to see them from Sony. So maybe just there were a couple of Sony agents here, so I don't know why they didn't sell that well, or they were never really known as a hi-fi brand back in the old days, I don't think. Not as well as some of the others like Pioneer, Rotel and all that sort of thing, which sold hundreds of amps and NADs even. But for some reason locally these are not very common. So I'll test that out on some bigger speakers. I reckon that'll run fine. I think it's just this, these speakers here are a bit rattly. I don't normally turn them up very loud. I guess I could try them on something else and see what they sound like. But I'll try these on my Mark II Tandy speakers. And this might be perfect for, I've got the old Pioneer direct drive turntable which I want to set up. And some old, what are the speakers? AR8 speakers. Acoustic Research ones that I reconed, and I want to set that up as a little system to run some vinyl on. Even though I don't reckon I'll be listening to much vinyl, but it'd be nice to have a little system just for that. So this might be the perfect amp for that. Okay, I just checked this amp out on a couple of dummy loads, and with about a 2 kHz signal at 1 volt going into it, you could turn it up to nearly 20 watts before you get any sort of distortion, but probably at the bass frequencies it might not be that good. About the only thing I noticed with it, it does have a slight dip in the volume somewhere. It seemed to go up and then it would pause a little bit and keep going. But I think that actual distortion, or what sounded like a scratchy volume, might have just been the actual speakers upsetting the CD player, because I've just tried it on the speakers again and moved the CD player a bit and it sounds fine. So I think this thing's okay. Certainly no distortion until you get like above the, I think it's above 20 watts in this, and it starts clipping sort of above that, which is to be expected since the thing's only really rated at about 12 watts. I reckon on a fairly bassy music, 12 watts RMS without any clipping or distortions probably fair for this thing, and you might be able to go even a little bit louder. But yeah, if you sort of listen to bass heavy stuff, you might get 15 watts or something out of it, maybe a bit more with not so bass heavy stuff. But I thought I'd just check it before I actually do hook it up to any speakers. But I think that there's no scratchiness at all in it, and on the oscilloscope you couldn't see anything as I turned the volume up, other than it did seem to delay a little bit, even though when I hooked the music back up to it I couldn't really find that spot. But I think it was somewhere around when you got to 1 watt on the meters. There seemed to be a little delay before the volume kept going up. But no, other than that, all seems to be working fine. So I thought I'd just give it a quick test and measure it with the oscilloscope and see if when it distorts, run it into some dummy loads. And yeah, now I think this amp's all fine, so I'll put this back together and give it a proper test by running some music through it for a while. Thanks for watching.